Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So, welcome to Finance 101. We are here tonight to discuss creating smart money habits so you can set yourself up for success in your personal financial life. My name is Liz Winkle, and I am a member of the Junior League. I am joined here tonight by my colleague, Kelly Stanley. Some housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone should automatically be muted and have their videos off before they join the meeting or at the beginning of the meeting. If you could please keep those settings as of now, that way the host can automatically be the main video. I'd like to introduce my colleague. Kelly is a certified financial planner and a fiduciary wealth advisor. She's been helping women gain control of their finances for 13 years now. She's also a busy mom of two, and she knows what it's like to juggle a demanding career and a full personal life, as well as being in charge of the family finances. We both strongly believe that it is imperative for women to be both financially competent and confident. So whether you're just starting off in your career or you have several decades under your belt, you can always benefit from taking control of your personal financial life now. Tonight, we are going to talk about the power of the purse. So we're going to talk about how women, whether you're single or you have a partner, you can save, invest, and make the right decisions for your personal financial life. I encourage all of you to ask questions. You can utilize the chat box. You can send those directly to me or to everyone, and we will answer all questions at the end. I've also had a couple of requests from women that couldn't make it tonight for this presentation to be recorded. So if you would like a copy of the recording, if there's a woman in your life that you think could benefit from this information, feel free to reach out to me after the presentation, and I will be happy to send you a link. With that, I think, Kelly, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. Good evening, everybody. I hope you all had a great day today. And as Liz mentioned, I'm super excited tonight to share some tips with all of you on how to become more financially confident and competent. And now is as good a time as any, because women have never had as much power over their money as they do now. Women control nearly 60% of the wealth in the United States, and they are increasingly becoming the primary or co-breadwinners of their families. Women are starting businesses at impressive rates, and women-owned businesses are growing at 5 times the rate of men-owned businesses. And did you know that if you were to add up all of the women-owned businesses in the United States and looked at their revenues, they would be considered the 5th largest in terms of GDP. Additionally, there is this massive wealth transfer that is going to be occurring over the next 40 years. Approximately $40 trillion will be shifting hands between the older generations and younger generations, with the vast majority of that expected to end up in the hands of women, because on average, we tend to live longer than our male counterparts. Therefore, it is more important than ever to boost your financial competence and confidence. Now, because your financial well-being depends on so much more than just your investment and retirement account balances, my goal for you is to come away with a number of actionable steps you can take to improve upon your own financial well-being. To that end, what I really want to focus on tonight is talking about 4 key concepts that can bring more meaning to your money. We're going to talk about how you can set up a system to pay yourself first. We'll talk about joy-based spending. We'll go over a broad overview of retirement saving options. And then lastly, we'll touch a little bit on investing in a couple of different investment approaches, especially evidence-based investing and how that can work for you. Now, before we talk about saving and spending, I love this quote from Warren Buffett. And he says, "Do not save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving." So this is the key concept behind paying yourself first. The 3 most powerful words in finance, personal finance, is pay yourself first. Now, before you consider how to spend the money that you're making, you want to make sure you're taking care of yourself first. You've all worked hard for the money that you earn, and you want to make sure it works hard for you. This is the true key to financial freedom. So that means saving, first and foremost, building up an emergency fund. what that entails is saving approximately, to save between 6 and 12 months worth of your expenses and keep it liquid. So it's purely just in cash. So what I mean by expenses are the outflows that you have on a monthly basis and that recur month after month, or anything that recurs annually. These are the things you have to pay for each month. So don't be, if you have a small balance right now in your savings, don't worry about that. The goal for tonight is just to start to begin to set up a system so that you can start to build that up over time. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. But the goal is to have, an oh shoot fund. God forbid something happens and let's say you lose your job, or you have unexpected medical expenses or car repairs. That is the whole purpose of having an emergency fund. And the funds in your emergency fund are not meant for a spontaneous vacation that you would like to take with your friends or family. It's really truly meant to be an account specifically set aside for emergency purposes. And that's not to say you shouldn't have other types of savings accounts for those other specific goals, but specifically we want to talk about the emergency funds. So 6 to 12 months worth of expenses you want to save up towards and keep it in a safe liquid account. There are plenty of online savings accounts that will pay a little bit more in interest than what you could get at your bank. Unfortunately, interest rates are really low right now. So you're not going to find anything with super high interest rates, most likely, but you should be able to find something that pays a little bit more than where you have your checking account. Now, once you've set up the emergency funds and you've got a system in place, what I would recommend is automating it. So perhaps you get paid every 2 weeks or every other week or once a month, whatever the recurring amount or whatever the date that you get paid. What you should do is set up a system to have funds transferred automatically on payday so that those funds kind of come into your account and then go right out so that they're starting to work towards your future goals for you. And then once you have that in place, then you can start thinking more longer term and thinking about retirement savings. And depending on where you're at in your life right now, retirement may seem like a far, far off, but time passes quickly, and before you know it, you're going to be at that point in time where you're starting to think more about retirement. So what I would suggest is that you'll want to be able to, again, a rule of thumb is try to save somewhere between 15 to 20% of your gross income. Now, again, that might not happen overnight. It may take some time to build that up. But start with what you can do now. And then as your income increases or if expenses decline, you can shift your cash flow to allocate more towards future long-term savings. The sooner you are starting to save for the long term, the better opportunity you're going to have to grow these dollars over time and have them make a positive and meaningful impact on your finances in the future. So you work hard for your money, you want to make it work hard for you, and you don't want to just give yourself the leftovers. So you want to make sure, again, that you're paying yourself first. This is another great quote as it relates to spending. And Will Rogers says, "Too many people spend money they haven't earned to buy things they don't want to impress the people that they don't like." I'm sure you've all heard of the term keeping up with the Joneses, and this is exactly what this is speaking to. There are many situations where we may find ourselves spending money on things that really truly aren't that important to us. So what I want to talk a little bit about are the different categories of spending. So the two main categories are non-discretionary and discretionary. So think of, as I mentioned, those fixed expenses that recur on a regular basis, insurance bills, utility bills, mortgage or rent payments, car payments. These are all non-discretionary spending categories that we know we have to account for every month. But there is some wiggle room within each of those categories as to how much you actually spend on those certain things. And then the other type is the discretionary spending. So this is more of the fun money. This is where you get to, choose how you want to allocate any leftover funds after you've already paid for you've paid for yourself first. You've set aside money for emergencies and for retirement, and you've already addressed the fixed expenses you have, and now you get to see what's left over and how you want to spend those dollars. It's also a great way to identify within that discretionary category if there are ways to possibly cut back on things that you may not need to spend on anymore. So you can learn how to prioritize your spending. And another way to go about doing that is to think of this concept called joy-based spending. So this is the fun part of spending, right? We all want to be able to treat ourselves and spend money on things that really truly bring us joy. So there are a couple of ways that you can identify the type of spending that brings you the most joy. So one thing you can do is look at your last credit card statement or your bank account and print off a list of your transactions and scan through it and highlight anything that you see in there that did not bring you joy. So thinking about, Marie Kondo and her concept of, going through your closet and getting rid of all the items that don't spark joy in your life. This is the same concept, but applying it to your spending. So you may be surprised as you have a greater awareness of where your money is going, that you can identify if there are certain things that you might want to cut back on. Now, for the discretionary items that fall towards the bottom of the list, you may want to consider cutting back on some of those things or just getting rid of some of those expenses. Somebody have a question? Or also I'm going to mute this person if that's okay. Okay, sorry about that. So again, the whole purpose is to, one, have a greater awareness of your spending, and then identify the areas of where you're spending your dollars to prioritize what makes you the happiest, and making sure that you're investing your hard-earned dollars in your own well-being as well. But of course, there's always going to be things that come up, these one-off expenses, which we talked about, the emergency type things that might arise that we might not see coming. This pandemic that we've all been living through for the past 18 months is a great example of that. So unfortunately, it was not something that any of us, I think, were expecting to live through. But we're still here, and unfortunately, a lot of people have lost, their jobs during this time frame, and it's created a big financial crisis for some people. So these are these types of expenses we can't plan for, and we want to make sure that we have a plan in place. So that's the emergency savings that we talked about. So again, it's just an exercise to identify where your dollars are going, maybe reallocate how you're spending those dollars, and perhaps coming up with some additional areas of your cash flow that you could reallocate to saving, or just moving it more towards the things you really want to spend your dollars on. We have a colleague of ours that has coined this concept of joy-based spending. And she says that joy-based spending is all about trying to figure out how to take each one of your hard-earned dollars and squeeze the most amount of fun and joy out of it as you possibly can. So, some people don't like the term budgeting, but if you look at it in this way, it can actually be somewhat enjoyable to develop a spending plan. Now, before we move on to some of the retirement savings aspects of what I wanted to cover tonight, I thought it would be helpful just to touch briefly on how important it is to have good money conversations with a significant other if you're in a serious relationship. So whether you're maybe newly engaged or in a serious relationship, or you're married and been married for a number of years, having a good line of communication with your significant other is super important. And we would always recommend that you sit down on somewhat of a regular basis. Maybe it's, once a month, at a minimum, or every 6 months at a minimum, just to discuss important topics such as employment. If you're both working, what is the income stream coming into the household? Perhaps there's a new baby on the way and somebody wants to possibly stay home and help raise that child. How is that going to impact your finances? A lot of different things that should be discussed, ideally prior to getting married, but obviously it's an ongoing conversation that you have to have. for richer or poor, marriage and money matters go hand in hand. So when you sign that marriage license, you're not only promising to have and to hold, but you're agreeing to one of the biggest, broadest financial commitments you're ever going to make. So, seeing eye to eye in finances is often easier said than done. And as a couple, you each are going to bring your own financial personality to your partnership. So we all have ingrained money scripts that took years to develop, and it has been based on habits that we have been, habits and lessons learned since we've been children, triggers that may cause us to spend one way or another, and just, it essentially is our own relationship with money, which is a very individual thing. So in order to have successful, marriage, having an open line of communication regarding finances is really key. So it's important to understand where each of you are coming from and understanding each other's hopes, financial hopes, realities, and again, just understanding where each of you are at with various things. So a couple of other things to take into consideration is, how are you going to handle the cash flow? One of the key questions I hear a lot from folks that are, newly married or planning to, merge their finances is, do we merge their finances at all, or do we keep them separate? And again, it's usually a very personal decision and what is going to work best for the two of you. But a couple of things to take into consideration is, what are each other's strengths and weaknesses as it relates to managing money? Do you think it's going to create less arguments if you join everything together and have a joint account and then pay all of your bills out of that joint account? Or perhaps you guys are, you're older and you've been on your own for a number of years and you want to keep things separate. That's fine too, as long as you have a strategy and a plan in place to address who's going to cover what expenses, and then what happens when, let's say, your income increases or decreases, or the expenses income or decrease, and how does that come into play if you each have certain things that you're responsible for? Because that will all change over time. We all know how, what we're paying today for groceries is far more than what we were paying probably, 2 years ago, just due to inflation and whatnot. So expenses are going to change. And you just want to make sure that you have a good conversation about how that's going to be addressed. Similarly, if you have debt outstanding, either one of you, you want to understand or talk about how that's going to be covered and who is going to, are you jointly covering that debt, or is the person who came to the marriage with the debt going to be responsible for that? Again, it's just another conversation to have. And then, lastly, family, and what does that mean in terms of how big of a family do you want? Because if you have kids, you know how expensive they can be. And there's a lot of things to take into consideration. The bigger your family, the more the expenses. So you just want to make sure that all of that is discussed throughout your marriage. So I'll just share one example. I've been married now almost 17 years. And from the beginning, my husband and I decided that we wanted to join our finances and create, have everything come into one account, and then we pay the bills out of our joint account. But one thing that we did realize early on is that when we did that initially, there was some arguments that occurred because my husband would be spending money on certain things that I didn't think were, he should be spending certain amounts of dollars on. So what we ended up having to do is create separate savings accounts, and we each get an allowance per se every pay period, where then, he can spend his money on whatever he wants. I can do the same. And then we know that everything else is going to be covered along the way with all of our bills and whatnot. So again, that's what works for us. We had to go through some little struggles initially to figure that out. But again, it just having those conversations is key. So now that we've talked a little bit about saving for retirement, or no, saving for emergencies, and then how to think about spending in a way that brings us more joy, I want to shift gears now and talk more long-term and thinking about the other types of savings you should be planning for when you set aside funds for yourself. You're paying yourself first. So there are 4 key concepts we're going to talk about in this next section. And the first one is, what types of dollars are you utilizing to save for retirement? Is it after-tax money or pre-tax dollars? What are the common retirement plan types? We're going to talk a little bit about the phenomenon of compounding and compound interest. And lastly, what are some things that you can do to ensure you're on the right track for a successful retirement? So first, let's touch on the different types of ways that you can save for retirement. So the main two ways you can save are considered Roth or traditional. And what this breaks down to is essentially any money that goes into a Roth, either IRA or Roth 401k, is money that you've already paid taxes on. So you start with a gross amount from your paycheck, you pay all the taxes that are associated with that, and then what's left over, you can then designate some of that to go into a retirement account. So the nice benefit from those types of accounts is that the money grows tax-free, and you won't pay any taxes on it when you take the money out of the account in retirement. So that's a nice, great benefit. On the flip side, we have traditional or pre-tax dollars. And it's just exactly how it sounds. So essentially you start with your gross paycheck, you designate an amount that you want to go into, let's say your 401k. So you do not get taxed on those dollars today. You essentially defer those taxes to some point in the future. And then you pay income taxes on the difference between your gross less the amount you're deferring into a 401k plan, for example. So you either pay taxes today or you're going to wait and pay them in the future. And not everybody has the option to contribute to a Roth. It, again, depends on your income level. But if you happen to be in the 22% tax bracket or below, that's typically the income range. If you're below the 22% tax bracket or within the 22% tax bracket, then that a Roth, either IRA or 401k, typically makes the most sense for you. So you're going to pay taxes today, and then once you retire, you will not have to pay taxes in the future based on current tax law as it stands today. So again, it's just two different ways of looking at it. If you're in the higher tax bracket, so if you're in a 24% tax bracket or above, then you would probably be better suited contributing to a traditional pre-tax retirement account option. So again, it just sort of depends on your income level and whether you want to pay the tax or defer it. Now, once you decide, what type of funds you're going to be contributing before tax or after tax, then you can figure out where you're actually going to put this money. So it really depends on your employer. If they offer a retirement plan to you, that's great. That's phenomenal. Not every company does. So, if you have the option to contribute to something, definitely want to take advantage of that. The most common type of plan is called a 401k plan. And the way that works, again, is you decided a certain amount of money to contribute to the plan. And then in many cases, your employer will also actually either match a portion of your contribution, or they will do what's called a safe harbor contribution, meaning they're required to contribute approximately 3% in many cases for your benefit into the plan. And then the money then grows, for your long-term benefit. I've got a question that just came in. I'm going to address it after we go through these accounts, and I'll come back to that. So a 403b account and a 457 account are very similar to a 401k. It's just that those are designated for certain types of entities. So 403b accounts are typically, you'll find those in a nonprofit situation. So schools, hospitals, those are the folks that typically have a 403b plan. And then 457b plans are what you would find within, cities and states. So for example, the Chicago Police Department and Fire Department, they have a 457 account that they can contribute to. Now, the max amount that you can contribute to these three types of plans right here, the 401k, 403b, and 457 for 2021 is $19,500. And then if you're over the age of 50, you can do an additional $6,000 on top of that. But let's say you're not working for a big company and they don't offer a 401k to you. What other options do you have to save? So there's always a traditional IRA or Roth IRA. Those are open to anybody as long as you have earned income. And the max amount that you can contribute to those in 2021 is $6,000. And you can only contribute 6,000 across both types of accounts. You can't do 6,000 to each, just so you're aware of that. But other small businesses may have what's called a simple IRA or a self-employed pension, which is essentially the ability for a business owner who has no employees to contribute money, pre-tax into an account. But let's say you're self-employed and then a couple of years down the road, you do have employees. Well, once you have an employee in place for 3 years, then you'd also have to contribute on their behalf if you participated in this self-employed option. So just keep that in mind as well. So there's a number of different types of plans available. Again, a lot of it's driven by, if you're working, who your employer is. But just know, let's say you're, 1099 employer, independent contractor, a self-employed pension or SEP IRA, also known as a self-employed pension plan, may be a good option for you. Or also you could do the regular traditional IRA or the Roth IRA. So lots of options out there. You just have to understand the differences between them. There was a question that said, are there penalties for taking money out of your Roth account since you already paid taxes on it? And that's a great question. So because you've already paid taxes on it, the Roth IRA is a special type of account because there does come a point in time where you can take money out penalty free. Now, normally you have to be over the age of 59 and a half to take money out without incurring any penalties. But there are certain instances where you can take money out of a Roth prior to age 59 and a half without penalties. So first-time home buyers, if you're using the funds for education, if you become disabled, all of those, you can take money out without penalty. And then also, you can take the money you've put in, as long as you've had the account open for 5 years, you can take your basis out. The amount you've actually contributed, you could take out penalty-free, but you just can't take out the growth within the account. So hopefully that helps answer that question. It's lots to learn, lots of nuances between all of the different accounts. Okay, so moving on here. Let's see, I think it's not moving here for a second. Get my slideshow to move and it's not moving. Why is it not moving? Huh. Okay, I think I shouldn't have gone to the chat because now I can't move my slide for some reason. There we go. Okay, so when it comes to long-term savings, one of the best phenomenons there is out there is this concept called compound interest. And Albert Einstein calls it the 8th wonder of the world, and it truly is pretty astounding how it actually works if you are invested for a long period of time. So he says, he who earns it, or I'm sorry, he who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So essentially what compound interest is when you earn interest, not only on your principal amount of your investment, but also on the accumulated interest from the previous growth that you've experienced within your account. So we'll walk through an example just to explain exactly how that works. What you're looking at here is two individuals. So we have Susan and Marvin, and they're 2 different ages. So you can see that Susan's only 19, Marvin is 28. They each would like to be able to save $5,000 a year. And what Susan does is she starts saving right at the age of 19 when she has employment income that she can contribute into a retirement account. However, she decides to stop investing after a 10-year time frame. So she's only put in $50,000 over a 10-year time frame. And then we have Marvin, on the other hand, who decides, once he starts working right out of college, that he wants to live his life and then enjoy all this extra cash flow that he never had before, and he spends all of his earned income. So he has nothing left to save. But then he learns, or he realizes, as he gets a little bit older, that he really needs to start saving and putting money aside for his future. So once he turns 28, he says, okay, I'm going to start saving now, and I'm also going to save $5,000 a year. But he's going to continue to contribute for over a time frame of 36 years. Now, if you look down at the bottom, you're going to see some pretty big numbers there. And Susan, her accumulated balance at the end of at the age of 65, after only saving $50,000, she has approximately, just over $1,027,000 in her account. And that's because she left it invested, and she earned an average rate of return of 7.5% over that whole time frame. So, nearly 46 years, that money had time to grow and grow, and it's going to be impacted by whatever's happening in the markets, but it's constantly earning interest on top of the interest, and that is the awesome benefit of compound interest. Now, if you look at Marvin on the other side here, you can see he had to save a lot more money over that 36-year time frame. And his total balance was only $869,000. You're probably wondering, how is that even possible? It's purely because Susan started savings, nearly 10 years earlier than Marvin did, and that made a huge difference in what the ending balances were of both of their accounts. So it's a calculation, a math calculation, but it's once you put it to work for you, it's pretty powerful. So if I can give you one piece of advice tonight, it would be, if you're not yet saving for retirement, I would figure out a way to start saving something as soon as possible to get that money working for you. So now that we've covered, I know I've thrown a lot at you guys, and we have covered, the importance of paying yourself first, and then addressing spending, and then looking at long-term savings. Now let's talk about how you actually go about investing for the future. So investing can be a lot like driving on an expressway. We like to think of it as two different main styles of investing. You could be, one way is, assuming you're driving in the left lane. So typically if you're driving in the left lane, you may be weaving in and out of traffic, trying to get that incremental advancement, get ahead of the person next to you, right? Or you may be the type that drives in the right lane. You may be driving with, your seatbelt on at the speed limit, kind of going steady here. But if you ever followed, if you're driving, you're following a car that tends to be like right near you when you're driving, but in the different lane, have you ever noticed that a lot of times you both end up reaching, let's say traffic comes to a halt, you both end up reaching that traffic right about the same time. Now, if you had been in the left-hand lane, you may have sweaty armpits and a palpitating heart, while if you were driving in the right lane, you could be nice and calm listening to NPR. So two different experiences that you may have depending on what lane of traffic you're driving in. Now, these two different types of styles of driving behaviors are very analogous to two different types of investment approaches or philosophies. So driving in the left lane is very akin to what we call active management, where the goal for the investment manager is to get that incremental edge by identifying superior companies to include in their mutual fund, for example. Whereas driving in the right lane is more akin to what we would call passive investing or index investing. So essentially, you're just trying to match the performance of an index and do it in a way that doesn't require you to, listen to all what's happening in the economy or listening to the headlines. You can kind of just set it and forget it almost. And then we have what's called this third lane of investing, or third lane of driving, which is similar to driving in the right lane, but you have GPS, right? So we all have GPS now on our phones, which is fantastic. So we know that, there's evidence if there's something coming up ahead that we might want to avoid in terms of traffic. So let's say you can see that there's construction up ahead and you want to be able to get around it. There's evidence of why you wouldn't want to be driving in the certain lane if it's going to, if the lane is going to be closing due to construction up ahead. So having this additional GPS, as we call it, is similar to what we would call evidence-based investing. So what this philosophy relies on is known facts and academic research that just shows how you can obtain a higher rate of return while decreasing the amount of risk you have by allocating your portfolio to other different asset classes, such as international asset classes, small companies, undervalued companies, that can really create a great portfolio with higher rates of return over time with less risk. Now, there's really, no wrong or right way to, regardless of which approach you choose to invest in, what makes the most difference over time is that you choose an approach that you can actually stick with. Because as long as you can stick with the approach and not and not be worried about, kind of what's happening all around you, you'll have a better experience over the long run. So there are a number of factors that really drive the overall long-term returns that you can obtain as an investor. And the number one factor is your behavior. So I can't stress this enough because we have seen so many examples of folks that, let's say, I don't know how many of you were investing back in the 2008 timeframe, but that was really the last, prior to this pandemic, the last time that there was a really big pullback in the markets. And that was a much longer time frame where it kind of took a while for it to continue. You continued to go down for a number of quarters. And for those folks that were concerned and were worried that they were going to, lose all this money, a lot of them sold what they had in the stock market and they got out and they sat in cash. Well, once you know what happened is most likely, or what happened is eventually that market turned around and went back up. And if they hadn't been back invested, they missed out on all of that growth. So that would greatly impact their overall long-term returns. So behavior is a number one factor that can drive returns. And then secondly is the amount you have invested in stocks, because in order to get a higher rate of return over time, you have to invest in what we call the stock market. So you have to invest in companies that go to work every day, that are trying to produce, a higher rate of return for their shareholders. And then the third and fourth are the amount you invest in smaller companies. And then those companies, again, that are considered maybe more undervalued now, but are expected to have a greater rate of return over time. And then things that can negatively impact the portfolio are market timing. So trying to pick the winners is sometimes a loser's game. And if you do pick winners on a consistent basis, that's awesome. And that's probably means you're very lucky because it doesn't happen very often. Or listening just to the headlines, the CNBC, maybe you've got a family member that is always, in your ear giving you advice, just because of what they're hearing, that might not necessarily have a good impact on your investing experience as well. Now, I love this little depiction here because I have it sitting in my office hanging up, but I think it really does a good job of explaining what it means, or what it's like to invest in the stock market over time. So it's like a roller coaster, right? There's always going to be times when the market is going up. There's going to be times when it's coming down. There's going to be times where it's just relatively flat. And again, you don't want to be the person that kind of waits until it gets, the market kind of gets higher, because one, you're going to be paying higher prices when you're buying it when it's up in value. And then you also want to avoid selling when the market comes down. All right. The better thing to do if the markets come down in value is to put more money in, because what's going to happen after it goes down is that eventually it will go back up. And then you want to be able to take advantage of that growth. Instead, if you're buying high and then selling at a loss, if you continue to do that repeatedly, you're going to go broke. So you definitely don't want to do that. You want to buy, and if you're contributing to a retirement plan at work, for example, on a regular basis, you're always going to be buying in at different prices, which over the long run will average out to be a lower price. I know I threw a lot at you. Again, this is a big, broad overview, but just giving you some things to think about and to contemplate as you go forward. But ideally, to set yourself up for success, the four key things, again, would be: one, pay yourself first. Ensure that you are setting aside funds every pay period that is being set aside for your goals. So whether it's emergency fund purposes, it's retirement saving purposes, or even if it's more shorter term goals. A lot of people are trying to save up for a down payment on a house. And a quick note on that is anything that you're going to need to save for within the next, I would say, like 1 to 3 year time frame, you really don't want that invested, because you don't want to run the risk of the market pulling back and then losing funds that you're going to need in a shorter time frame. Instead, look for higher interest earning savings accounts for shorter term goals like that, in addition to your retirement, your emergency savings. So once you got an automated way of saving for your future, secondly, you want to choose an investment approach that you can stick with. Again, there's no right or wrong way to invest. It's essentially, you'll have a greater, smoother experience if you can choose an approach that you can stick with and not cause you to panic and want to sell out and then not know when to get back in, because that just creates a whole lot of stress and anxiety. And then you're going to feel like you're missing out if for some reason, the market turns around quickly, for example. So find something that you can stick with over the long run. Third is just make it a priority. There's always going to be something that comes up that we can't expect, but you want to plan. I mean, none of us knows how long we're going to be here on this earth, but hopefully it's a nice long time. And you want to make sure that you are saving for yourself so that you can live a great life and enjoy the lifestyle that you've become accustomed to in the future as well. And then lastly, get help. If you don't feel comfortable doing this on your own, leverage the help of an advisor. There are thousands of advisors available across the country. Everybody has different, clientele that they work with and different specialties. But it's very possible to find one that works with your budget, what you're looking to accomplish, and the needs that you have at this point in time. So who do you turn to in that regards for help? The good news is there's a lot of great organizations out there that has trusted advisors that you can turn to. So the key to look for is ideally working with somebody who's considered a fee-only fiduciary advisor. So what that means is they are not compensated by selling you products, but they are only compensated for the advice that they're giving you. And fiduciary just means they have to do what is in your best interest at all times. So ideally, if you can find somebody that's a certified financial planner, because they always have to act as a fiduciary, that's key. But there's also these great organizations that help you search, and you can filter down and determine like who is a best fit for you based on where you're at in your life and what kind of help you need at any given point in time. So there's the Financial Planning Association, there is the Certified Financial Planner Board, and then there's an organization called NAPFA, also a group of fee-only advisors. And there's also another group called the XY Planning Network, and they cater to folks in Gen X and Gen Y. So these advisors are across the country. Most of them work virtually in this XY Planning Network, but there are some, I believe, that do, meet in person. So again, there are all these filters that you can find in each of these websites that will help you drill down to finding somebody who would be appropriate for what your needs are and what you're looking for. So I would say the biggest thing is just being aware of how they're compensated. Again, and if they are compensated from product sales, just make sure you understand, what that compensation is and what they're getting for it. So just be aware of the different types of advisors out there. So I know I've thrown a lot at you, and we now wanted to open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to turn on your camera and unmute yourself if you'd like to ask. You can also throw them in the chat box. If you don't have any questions, that is okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about personal finance tonight. Our information is listed here. If anyone thinks of a question later tonight or down the road, feel free to give Kelly or myself a call or shoot us an email. We'd be happy to point you in the right direction. I've also listed our website here. We have tons of blog posts and videos and resources that might be helpful to you. And we even have a white paper that includes 15 questions that you should ask a financial advisor if you are thinking about hiring someone to help you professionally. But if you do not have any questions, feel free to hop off and have a great night. Kelly and I will stay around for just a couple of minutes in case anyone wants to stick around and ask a personal question.
Hey, I have a question for you guys.
Sure.
I know you mentioned that there's some like online checking or savings account that might have like higher yields. Do you have any like recommendations for ones?
Yeah, so what I typically do is I go to bankrate.com, so BANK rate.com, and you can search savings accounts. And then I typically drill down to see, who I've heard of before. Personally, I've had experience with Capital One is where I keep my own online savings. Another common one is Ally Bank, Discover Bank. They usually have typically higher rates. Sometimes you'll get a higher rate of return or interest rate initially, and then it might drop after a little bit. But I also look for the accounts that don't require a minimum balance and you don't want to pay fees. So there's a lot of great online institutions that will let you set up an account, zero minimum balance, zero fees, and the interest rates are competitive to what you would be able to find, amongst other competitors. But I think right now rates are hovering typically around 0.35% is what I've been seeing lately. And just maybe even last summer, it was up in the 2% range. So rates have come down, quite a bit. So it'll fluctuate over time based on what the interest rate environment is. But I would start with bankrate.com, and then you can kind of filter down and search through, kind of what you're looking for.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Well, as Liz said, feel free to follow up via email. Our email addresses are up there. Happy to get back to you guys in the next couple of days or so if you've got any additional questions for us. Otherwise, thank you again for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.